Welcome, U.S. Virgin Islands Chess, to another online virtual tutorial. If you've selected this video, you've looked at the FIDE online rated Blitz and Rapid matches brought to you by our host Colin Heim with U.S. Virgin Islands Chess. It's your instructor, guys. Everybody doing okay? Well, we got a long game here to look at. My opponent here from Russia, his name was something Popov. Anyway, Popov had the white pieces. Guys, so far I've played about 5 games in the FIDE rated online arena, and I have gotten all black pieces, right? So I think there's only been like one game, maybe. Anyway, this game was a rapid game. This was 10 plus 10 second increment, and my opponent with the white pieces here started the game with 1 to e4. Very, very instructional game, ladies and gentlemen. Let's look at this one, and it's just very, very instructive, kind of like an over-the-board game, and let's take a look at why. So Sicilian defense, knight to c3, opting for developing the knight, queenside knight instead of the kingside knight. So d6, Kasparov's defense, knight to f3, now 2 knights, and b6. Okay, so we don't see this too often played by black. But the goal is to get the bishop now to b7 square and see what white has to respond with. b3, played by my opponent, Popov from Russia, rated about just over about 1,000. Right, so guys, remember as I mentioned in the previous video, if you looked at the other video in this playlist, the first one, they start you off at about 900 when you get your official FIDE ID. And in this game, I was rated somewhere around 950. And my opponent rated somewhere like maybe 1,052, I think, somewhere around that, from Russia. Anyway, okay, bishop b2 and bishop g7 now going for the dragon, so-called dragon Sicilian, a modern defense, guys, of the Sicilian. Rook b1 now, just defending, just in case black wants to take. Bishop g4, bishop b5 check, and now dropping back my light squared bishop. Not too much strategy in this game. Knight takes d7, but let's see why it's a very instructional endgame, guys, because this game actually goes right to the endgame very, very shortly without too much middle game theory being put to the test. So knight e5, and after I played knight e5 in this position, my opponent played knight to d5. So very strange. Didn't want me to take with the bishop. I guess in this position, let's just analyze this for a second, guys. If knight captures, which is recommended by the engine, and bishop captures, what would be the best continuation here for white? Maybe rook to e1. Anyways, none of that happened in the game. Instead, my opponent opted for knight to d5, as we just mentioned. And then now, I would say kind of stealing the initiative here and going for now knight f3, and after queen f3, now I'm capturing the long fianchettoed bishop, and that was why he had played rook b1. For that prophylaxis. So not too much strategy played in this opening, but this game goes right to the end game, guys, very, very shortly, and we're going to go over how instructive this end game was with just rooks and knights and pawns. Okay, so we're going to study it in depth here. We're going to try to go for about maybe 10-15 minutes here. Again, guys, this is Colin Heim with U.S. Virgin Islands Chess at home and abroad. If we got any masters elsewhere watching, let's take a look at this online FIDE rated rapid game, guys. Sorry for the late introduction. Here we go. Knight e3, played by my opponent. Just dropping back after e6, kind of asking a question. And now queen to f6 is a very good move, guys, because, girls and guys, look, now b2 is under attack. So it actually forces an exchange. Or maybe if white opts for something like c3 here and then queen captures. I mean, there's an open g file now for white, so maybe this is okay. I'm not sure. Maybe black doesn't even have to capture, or castle here rather, and maybe just the game can continue. I still kind of think white's a little better here, or maybe black's better now because the pawn structure is better on the king side. Anyway. None of that happened in the game. c3 was not played. Instead, white just captures f6. Okay, so queen f6, knight captures f6, and d3. Okay, so this is sort of the beginning of the instruction that I wanted to cover in this game for everyone. D3 is, I think D3 is normal here. Kind of asking a question of black. Well, it's your chance to continue. You kind of have a receded pawn chain over here on the king side. My pieces are better than yours. They're more advanced. Right. That's what he's saying essentially with D3. So I responded in this position with rook to d8, and after f4, pawn pushed by my opponent, now pushing the king side, d5 and e5. Right, so a real sword fight here, guys. That's why I wanted to go over this, because it's so interesting. Even though this was a pretty low-rated level game, let's go over the intricacies of this real duel. This was a real sword fight. Okay, so knight h5, maybe not the best square to put the knight, because now, I mean, white could just play g4. Instead, my opponent played rook b back to b1, wanting to connect those rooks on the first rank. And now d4 asking a question of the white knight, and the white knight goes to c4 square. King to e7. King to e7 now evading the check. Evading the check here on d6 square. That's why I played king e7, guys. Rook b e1, rook h g8, and a4. Okay, so white definitely looks better here in a sense, but this is a good queenside pawn chain for black here, guys. That's actually really decent, that pawn chain. So now g5 played by myself, f5, now attacking e6 pawn, but now opting for g4, and f6 check. Okay, so now white has two passed pawns, and it looks like it could kind of get ugly for black in this position after king to d7. But let's see what happens after g3. King c7, right, knight to d6, rook gf8, knight goes to b5, attacking a7 pawn, king to b7, and rook to a1, a6. See how instructive this is, guys? This is why I wanted to go over this. Knight d6 check, king c6, and a5. b5. Okay. So this is just back and forth. This is kind of like a game of battleship, so to speak. Who's gonna sink the other's battleship first? Right, king to g2, rook back to g8. The rooks just keep swinging back and forth between squares. Right, knight f7 and rook f8. Now attacking the knight, saying, where are you going to go? Knight goes to h6. That gives me a chance to now lift my rook on the g file, guys, and now I'm just going after that e5 pawn. So f7 now, ready for a queen at some point, I think my opponent. Yeah, and then now rook captures e5, knight to g4, and the white king is now finally getting a check from myself on e2. Right, king goes to h3, rook c2 capturing the pawn, and rook a to e1 now attacking. Yeah, just going after e6 pawn. Knight drops back to g7 now, defending the pawn, and after knight to e5 check, king is going over to d6. That's correct. Knight g4, pawn to g4, and rook to b2, attacking b3, g5, ignoring the pawn push on the g file. Guys, my opponent's ready to back up the f7 pawn, and that's exactly what he does after rook to f3, defending d3 pawn, knight to f6. Very complicated endgame, guys. G6, and I have to capture now. If I don't capture and play something else, like let's say, well, I don't see any other move. I have to capture in this position. So after h takes g and knight takes, okay, the rook is under attack. But now, since I have my beautiful outpost knight on f5, I was able to get my knife to f5, so to speak. It's now blocking the attack of the rook on f3. So now just rook captures f7, and I'm actually winning this position now. So at first I was pretty far behind, but I was able to maneuver through the attack of the white knight on the queen side, and able to make do with a very precious, lovely endgame here on the king side. And this is the beginning of the end for Team White, ladies and gentlemen. Rook to h7 now, attacking king on h3. King goes back to g2, and now there's another check. Immediately followed with rook b2. King falls back to g1, And now that black knight, sorry to say to my opponent with Team White here conducting the white pieces from Russia, rated just about over 1,000 and maybe almost like 1,100. We'll say like 1,150, yeah. So just almost reaching 1,100. 93 is just devastating. It's a very, very strong horse, for lack of a better term. H3, and now, guys, can you find really the beginning of the end now for White? Do we see the check? Okay, not checking first, but just kicking that knight away. Kicking the knight away here is very important, and we'll describe why. Knight to E2 was a blunder, because now after rook to G7, checking the white king here, guys, in this position, king has to go to H1, or should go to H1, or else is getting mated. Right, guys, if going to one of these unsuggested squares and it's just checkmate. Well, not really checkmate. King can still go back to to H1, and then after that, rook captures, and then we have this endgame, and black is completely winning. So none of that was played in the game. After rook G7, king H1, and now my rook can just go to G2, and this looks fatal for Team White. Rook to F7, just one last thrust, and after rook E2, capturing the dead horse for Team White. Rook F6, checking the black king, and the black king goes back to E7 now, just attacking the rook. And if something in this position, like just rook captures, then this is happening, and white is getting checkmated. In any variation, white is getting checkmated. So in this position, my opponent played rook from E to F1, and in this position, I played rook H2 check. The only move is king G1 to be correct, and now finally the mating square, G2, and my opponent lost the game with about 5 minutes to go. And this game was super instructional. That's why I wanted to share it with everyone. Very important to look at this, game of tug of war. Can we go back somewhere, everyone? Can we go back to somewhere like king E7 in this position where pushing for D4 now and sort of claiming the queen side now for black, and then after knight has some squares to hop over to for Team White, and all these rook maneuvers. A5 was questionable, I guess. G5 was also questionable because now my king is getting checked after F6, and it looks like white has a better king side for sure, but after a series of moves here by white, it seems like black is able to just keep these rooks swinging back and forth. There we go. We see another swing to the queen side from the white side. A6 and knight is going to D6. So very, very interesting here. This was not sort of a casual performance, but really a test of wits. Okay, you're pushing, now I'm pushing. Now your knight is maneuvering, now my king is getting out of the way. Now I'm putting my rook on a better square, now I'm taking your pawn. Now I'm attacking your knight. So he had a couple nice knight takes, and he was able to gobble up some material. And then remember, guys, even this pass pawn here on F7, and after rook E5 now winning another pawn, and then him capturing on G4, I mean, this really does look better for white, but what were some of the key moves that black played here? Gaining a tempo with check, now picking up the C pawn, him swinging his rook back again to E1, and all these maneuvers, just sort of a test of wits. King to D6 and G4, and now threatening to capture the B pawn, and just a real war here, right? Luckily, knight to G7 was a really good move because now knight F5 by black, and this is definitely favoring black now. I was able to get to F5 and cut off this move. I don't think G5, G6 was best because now after captures, as we mentioned, just knight captures, and now the F7 pawn is not defended as it was originally by this E5 knight, guys. So that horse, once it decides to take there, rook is stealing the F7 pawn, and now after the knight drops back, well, gaining another tempo with check, telling the king to get the hell out of here. You need to go back home to your first rank, and yeah, so this was just beautiful now. the course of that knight from G7, F5, and now to E3 was just beautiful. Very much a dominant now knight. As we can see, the horse is conducting the end for Team White. And what was a better move for White in this position, guys? Can we find a better square? Can we find a better square for the knight? Was there any better square for the knight? Well, if knight goes back to G2 and then knight captures, yeah, you can't recapture with the king here because it's defended by the black rook on B2. So in this position, sort of conceding. Remember, rook G7, king H1, and I think we can stop here. Thank you guys for watching. You should have got a lot of nice understanding about this this endgame. You know, this holy communion between the knights and the rooks on each team, and just sliding back and forth between pawn pushes, knight jumps, defending. Whole lot of exciting stuff. Feel free to review and watch the video as much as you need to grasp the maneuvers and the tactics and the numbers and the algebraic notation. Thanks again for watching, and everyone have a nice time. See you on the other side. This is Colin Heim with U.S. Virgin Islands Chess at Home and Abroad. Take care, thanks, and bye-bye for now. See you on the other side.